In our turbulent times, we fail to understand the importance of family with multiple kids to build a strong society. We push aside any thought of our historical identity, both spiritual and temporal, and we struggle to know how to express our faith publicly in society. Our guest today, Archduke Edward von Habsburg from the royal line of the Habsburgs, brings clarity to this confusion and charts for us a way forward that can bring true freedom, peace, and purpose. Stay with us.
Welcome to another episode of the Catholic Gentleman Podcast. We are your hosts, Sam Guzman and John Heinen. And we have a very special guest today that we're extremely excited to have on. But before we get to that, we just want to put on your radar the upcoming launch of the Catholic Gentleman membership program known as Catholic Gentleman Plus. That'll be coming on June 1st. And it's something that I think you'll really enjoy. We have been working on a lot of special content, exclusive content that will be made available to men to help you grow in holiness ultimately. So we're really excited about that launch. Stay tuned for more news as that date approaches. But we've been working really hard on that, and we're excited to share it with you. But without further ado, we are extremely excited to have Archduke of Austria, Edward Habsburg. He is Hungary's ambassador to the Holy See and the Sovereign Order of Malta. His family is royalty through and through. The Habsburgs have reigned in Austria, Hungary, Germany, Spain, and quite a few other places. Edward is a diplomat and social media personality, and his wife, Baroness Maria Theresa von Gudenus, if I'm saying that right, have 6 children. And Edward is the author of several books, including a children's book, Dubby the Double-Headed Eagle. I love that. As well as volumes on Thomas Aquinas, James Bond, and Harry Potter, novels and screenplays. So there's very little that he hasn't done. So thank you so much for being with us.
I never inhaled. That's one of the things I've never done. No, I've never taken drugs. That was a joke. That was a joke.
Thank you for clarifying.
Thank you for having me on the show. Thank you for having me on the show.
Well, wonderful. Yeah, and you just launched a new book, The Habsburg Way. And I love this because you're one of Europe's most prominent. You're from one of Europe's most prominent, royal families, and people are casting about for some kind of tradition or something that's a little more stable in our uncertain times. I mean, I've heard a lot of people kind of just despairing at the world situation right now. Everywhere you look, there seems to be political problems in almost every nation. Rapid inflation, people are struggling to make it economically. Religiously, things are kind of in chaos as well. And so it seems like pretty much everywhere you look, there's instability, chaos, uncertainty. And what you're really doing is calling us to a different way in our times. And so I would just wonder what inspired you to write this book, and why now?
The genesis was very easy. A friend of mine suggested I should write a book for Sophia Press on the Habsburgs. And I said, I don't just want to write another family history, because they are very good family histories, a very professional one, written by historians. And I said, I want to do something else. And last year or 2 years ago, I gave a talk in Boston. And I was introduced to the audience, and they told me, listen, you talk about your family, but don't just talk about Catholic faith, because some people in this room are not going to be Catholic. So I said, okay, what other things are cool about the Habsburgs that non-Catholics can appreciate? That's how I began sort of making that bucket list. And I began writing, okay, what would be a typical Habsburg rule? And then I gave that talk one evening. It was longer. It was 10 points. And then when they came with the idea for the book, I grabbed that list again. And then I began just sort of leafing through my different Habsburg books from over the years and looking for elements. And I said, wow, there is something here. And when I began doing that, I began to think and said, wait a minute, a few of these things have gone out of fashion. And then I said, why? And then I said, well, we live in a time, as you just said at the beginning, Sam, we live in a time where people seem to be a bit lost, where people are glued to the screen, don't face each other, but just the computer or the phone all the time, and where a very strong prevailing mainstream is trying to tell you that you can be something different every day. You don't have to take any responsibility. You only live for yourself. You are alone all your life. Take most of it that you can get. And I said, why don't I try to put a few things to paper that our grandparents knew and the last 10,000 years before that, and propose them again, but under the guise of this being Habsburg rules, which they are. And what I then do is, for each of these topics, I go through history and I say, how did the Habsburg try to live this rule through the centuries? And why does it make sense? With the idea of saying, okay, now how are you going to implement this today? And how could we have a bit more of this in our society? That's the idea of the book.
Yeah, thanks so much. That's just terrific. I mean, literally every single point that you touched on was what the Catholic Gentleman is fighting for and to reclaim. And actually, one of those things that I wanted to start with was this section on marriage and having lots of children. Both Sam and I have lots of children. We both have 5, and really blessed to have them and excited. And we know, and we argue that, family is the backbone of society. And we even take it a step further and say that, where goes the father, there goes the family, and there goes, society. And so I'd love to hear from you just a little bit more about the strength of society dependent on marriage and strong marriages and having children. And then some incredible stories that the Habsburgs have been able to display throughout the ages. So.
Well, I mean, you run through an open door, as we say in Europe, because this is a topic that's very dear to my heart.
Oh,
I not only believe that family and children and lots of children will give you long-lasting happiness as a couple and will be the greatest gift to your children. The greatest gift you can give to your children is to give them many siblings. It's really, I can tell that now when my youngest is now 15, sorry. She would be very cross, 15. And the eldest is 26, and I see them interact today, and I just say they have such strong bonds. They're such a team, even if they're spread over several countries. They always interact. They always care for where the others are, and they have each other's backs. I mean, it sounds rose-tinted, but that's the way it is. But my other point is society doesn't work without family, and society doesn't work without numerous families. And my theory is if you only have one child, this child will have a hard way of learning the basic virtues of life. If you have 6 children, like we do, or 5, which is very generous, they automatically will learn everything they need to know to build a just society around the dinner table. You will learn everything at home. You will learn to care for others. You will learn to look out for the weaker. You will learn that you sometimes have to moderate what you say because other people might be terrified by it. You will learn that when somebody's crying, you should be the one listening. All these things you will learn in a large and numerous family, and it takes away. The parents don't have to do that much. It happens automatically if you have a big family, and this is the basis of a state that is full of solidarity, of love, and looking after the weakest members, be that unborn children, be that people with handicap, or be that the imaginated. You learn this at home. You learn this in a big family. And I just imagine it must be much more difficult if you grow up alone with both parents working away. So this is my experience, but this is also the Habsburg experience. Now, the Habsburgs, of course, were Catholic through the centuries, always in the last 800 years. So having a big family was the most normal thing in the world. And if you read my book, you will see many, many examples of that. But for today's world, this is the answer. It's strongly countercultural. You have to defend yourself if you have a big family. But it is the thing, it is the answer. And the ultimate point is, if you have a big family, it's like, how do you call it when the wagons make a circle so the enemy can't get in? You have a sort of fortress where they can't put their wires into your brains there. The family is sort of a safe space where you can share values. So strong endorsement of family for everybody listening.
Yeah, I love that because I think, we look to us in America, at least, we look to the old world, Europe, like as if, the big Italian family or, the big German family was still a thing. And yet we know that's changed. And to the point where there's a population decline happening really globally because people aren't having children anymore. But I love the way you express that about family being like a safe place, a fortress where you rely on each other and you learn to love in that context, as a really beautiful way of putting it. But you come from one of Europe's oldest families. I personally can't imagine being able to trace my roots back 800 years. And you start your book off with a great little chapter introducing what it was like to grow up a Habsburg. So, this is probably the first and last time that we will have nobility on our show. But what was it like growing up an archduke? What was it like growing up in one of Europe's oldest, most prestigious families? And how did you kind of internalize that reality and grow into that as a boy and as a young man?
That's a very good question. First of all, it's really cool to be part of such a family, but you have to learn to cope with that, because I would say being a Habsburg offers you a ready-made identity. First because of your family history, and then because of the expectations of people. It's like you have a little spotlight flying over your head all the time. People look at you in a different way, and they expect you to be a certain way. And what that certain way is for you to find out. And this is also part of my book. What do you stand for if you're a Habsburg? But it's really cool. You have cousins all over Europe. Wherever you go, you can stay at family. That is really cool. You grow up with a strong sense of roots, of history, where you belong. If you don't want to belong to that, you have to make a conscious step out of it. You can say no. You can rebel against it. You can say no, I don't want that. But it's a really nice family. We're not famous for backstabbing, massacre, and conquests. We're famous for marriage, family, bringing countries together, respecting the diversity of different countries within the empire. That's really cool. And what I tell in the book, and what really was my way of understanding that I have to look into my family history, was whenever in school, the teacher said, but this is a topic Mr. Habsburg surely can tell us about, because the Habsburgs pop up almost in every century in the last 800 centuries of European history. So whatever you talk about, there'll be a Habsburg lurking somewhere, and they expect you to know all about it. But you don't, of course, when you're a child. You might have, caught snippets from your parents talking at the table about Emperor Franz Joseph. You may have an idea about him. But somebody mentions Emperor Charles V of Spain, and you wouldn't even know which century that is. So you blush, and you decided I would have to look this up when I come home. That's the way how you grow into it. The other thing that you also do is that sometimes your father or your uncle takes you to an event where you suddenly have, a remembrance celebration for some emperor who died 150 years ago. and there would be people who would look at you and the other family members with tears in their eyes. You suddenly say, wow, what is this? And then they would be Schützen, these people in traditional uniforms with their old historic guns shooting in the air as a salute and something like that. And they sort of look at you and expect something. And you realize, wow, I can't just sort of live my way in a normal. I have to understand what this is. And also, if you're from a family that ruled over 600 years, what's your job today? What's expected of you today? How does that translate into the 20th century, 21st century? So that's the way you become a Habsburg. And that is helpful because you have cousins all over the world. So you have big family meetings where you interact with other Habsburgs, and you see, okay, they have the same dilemma. They try to understand what are we supposed to do today. Okay, so that's more or less how it goes. It's wonderful.
Yeah, no, that's really exciting, and it's unifying in a way. And I think that I wanted to actually continue forward with this thought right now, and how you're encouraging men to embrace their identity. So on the Catholic Gentleman, we talk frequently about our identity as sons of God and as, men created in Christ, renewed daily by the Holy Spirit, and these sort of things. But you bring it down to a very practical temporal level. And I will say that in preparation for this episode, I was unaware how the Habsburgs had, influenced my family in a way, having my children are 8th generation Texans, which we're really proud of, right? I married into it. I live in Texas, very proud of that. And then to find out that the Habsburgs installed the first governor of Texas back in the 1600s was pretty moving. And your reach is everywhere. And so and later on, I read this, the quote, that famous quote from Otto von Habsburg, the son of Blessed Karl, who, if any of our listeners remember, we had David Ross on talking about that, but he said, those who don't know where they come from do not know where they are heading because they don't know where they stand. And I think this is so important. And especially in today where we're actually being either gaslighted or we are called to somehow reject our history and not accept and endorse. And you're expanding this beyond just, you're really amazing dynasty and royal lineage, but for each of us and the importance of our standing, our identity. And I'd love for you to talk just a little bit more about how that influences culture when men actually understand their identity and trying to live that out.
Yes. You told me you have a book about chivalry behind you.
That's right.
I believe that most of us men dream of being knights in the service of a king. One place where I feel it very strongly is in my Catholic faith. Thank God, my faith encourages me to kneel down quite a lot. And there is this old saying that you're never bigger than when you kneel in front of God. This is something that strongly influenced me all my life. The humility to know I take my sword, I take everything I do from the hand of God. It's not me deciding about my life. I bow under a greater ruler. My life is at the feet of God, and this is a chivalry element that all of us are looking for and striving for, and we've been told to throw all of that away, but it's ridiculous because one of my most frequent things that I say is we are able to read a letter of Seneca. This is 2,000 years ago. We are able to read the Odyssey and the Iliad and understand it, understand the emotions of the heroes of the Iliad. That's 2,600 years ago. How can you ever say that man changed? We are the same. Nothing magic happened in the 60s that transformed us into superhuman beings. Nothing magical happened when internet arrived. We are the same. We're the same clay that we've been, and my theory is 10,000 years ago. The same clay. We struggle with the same, and the same things are attractive and lift us up above our urges, lift us up above our everyday treadmill. We want to aspire to great things. It's easier when you're a Habsburg because, as I told you, but in my book, I encourage everyone to live it. Because not all Habsburgs lived what they were, but those who did really became great characters.
Thanks be to God.
Yeah, that's wonderful. And And kind of following up on that, related to, you see in our culture, there's like this fascination and simultaneous contempt for royalty. Like you said, like every man like kind of wants to be a king at some level, and yet, and you see this like in like these modern, secular, not Christian men's movements. They're like we're kings, we're royalty, like, but people don't really understand what that means, and we see also too, in the history, recent history of Europe, kind of this attack on royalty, both politically and even militarily, sometimes, where these wars to kind of undo the last remnants of Christendom, and coming from this, historic royal family, and like, how do you, like, what does royalty have to say to the modern world? Like, is there still a place for that? And how do you understand, your position as kind of coming from this great lineage, this history, and being nobility yourself? Like, how do you understand the place of royalty, and what does that have to teach us as men today, in the modern world?
In one chapter in my book, I speak about my experiences when I got the chance in my youth, in my teenage years, to get to know some of the current rulers in Europe, kings and grand dukes and princes, when they were in training. And I understood an incredible amount about what royalty can bring to the table and what modern politics has somehow lost. If you grow up as a future king or queen or grand duke, you grow up in an attitude of service all your life. You know that you have to serve your country. You know that you cannot do whatever you want, but whatever you do has to serve your country, keep it alive, keep it united, keep it in peace. All your actions. If you live in a country with several languages, like the King of Belgium, you will learn not to use one of these languages more often than the other, just out of trying to keep your country together. You will get to know all the fault lines of a country. You will get to know all the parties, and you will never go to your service in an attitude of egotism. You also don't have the luxury to be in politics for a few years and then find a nice fat job somewhere at a big company and earn lots of money and have a nice evening of life with a yacht and something like that. You don't have that, because you will serve until you don't serve anymore, and then your son or daughter will take over and have to live with the consequences of what you do. So this is all part of the concept of royalty and of monarchy. Now, most of the monarchies today in Europe are very, very weak echoes of what monarchy used to be once, but they are still there. God bless every single one of these royals that serve with grace. And if you look at the way that, for instance, Prince William treats people when he speaks with them, behaves, when you look at the Prince of Liechtenstein, when you look at the Prince of Luxembourg, and you see the way that they interact with people, that they serve their countries, that they speak. This is gracious people who speak from deep experience, wisdom, and an attitude of service. And we live in a time where people have become nervous about their politicians. They don't trust them that much anymore. We had 2 very difficult years where many people had the impression that some things didn't go really well. And I want to take one little episode from my book here, when President Roosevelt visited Emperor Franz Joseph in 1910, I think, and he had a half-an-hour audience in the Hofburg in Vienna, and Roosevelt, wanted to rile the emperor a bit, just a little bit. So at the end of the conversation, he says, "But Your Majesty, now that we have parliaments and politicians and governments, what exactly is your job?" And the emperor said, "My job is to protect my people from their politicians."
Nice.
And I ask you, who protects us, the people, from our politicians nowadays. So I'm just saying, this is not the pitch for monarchy. The United States are not the place for monarchy, but for the values of monarchy and for the values that make monarchs examples in as political leaders. And we can ask these values, these rules, these principles. We can ask them from any politician. So I want to give one strong example. One very strong example is, of course, Blessed Emperor Karl, Blessed Charles, that you have a book by Charles Coulomb. When Blessed Charles, he is for me the most chivalric of all Habsburg emperors. First of all, he fought in war. He was in the trenches, but also in the eyes of the world, he's a loser. He took over the empire after 70 years of Franz Joseph, nearly 70 years. In the middle of a war, he lost the war. He lost the empire. He only ruled for 1.5 years. Twice he tried to return to Hungary, where he was still king. Twice it failed. He went into exile. He died on an island from a terrible bronchitis called lung disease. That's the ultimate definition of a loser, first view. But now if you look on my Twitter World Championship of the Habsburgs that I did over the last 6-8 weeks, he won. He's the most popular Habsburg. Why? Because he did what every one of us can do. He offered his life, his family, and his job to God. And when he was in Madeira, there was a moment afterwards, his wife was told, he looked up to the church and he afterwards told her he had offered his life for his people. He had said, God, take my life so that my people can be in peace. And when he was suffering and dying over 2 weeks and he had horrible pains, he always said, I have to suffer very much so my people can be in peace and together. And I asked myself, this is a spirit that I would like to see in some of our political leaders. What are we ready to give for our countries? We as men, we aspire. This man was lying in bed, but he was a knight on a battlefield. He fought this battle with the eyes towards the Lord. They had the Blessed Sacrament in the next room, so he was always watching. And he also said, if the Blessed Sacrament or my devotion to the Blessed Heart wouldn't be here, I couldn't survive this. I couldn't stand this suffering. But with it, it's not difficult. And this is chivalry. This is knightlyhood. And everybody can do it. You can do it lying in bed with your fingers clasping a rosary. Even if you can't move your body anymore, you can be a knight on a battlefield. And he was that. That's why he's the great example for our family.
Yeah.
That's really, just to comment on what you're saying, the complete opposite of what the world says is what kingship is all about. When these kind of like secular guys say like I'm a king, like they usually mean like I'm this powerful man that like gets what I want out of life and other people serve me. But what you're describing is the exact opposite. And sacrifice, service, loyalty, like just that attitude of constant sacrifice for others, like that's the exact opposite of what the world says kings should be.
Yeah, exactly. And I feel that's what was coming to my mind while you were talking. Yeah, please.
No, go ahead, John.
No, that's what was coming to my mind as you were talking was this, this idea of monarchies or royalties as somehow power hungry, profit driven and controlling, nobility. Instead, as you've already done a great job discussing with us, it's that it's really protecting the liberty and the freedom and the peace of the people. And it should be the intent of them. And that actually goes into my next question or point of conversation on subsidiarity, which you do such a great job defining in your book. And I think it's so important. And I imagine a lot of our listeners don't understand subsidiarity. So I would love for you to kind of define that and then talk about why it was so important to the Habsburgs and why it's so important today when we have issues like the same-sex marriage and stuff that here in America that's being pushed upon us from the federal government. But even at the state level, it shouldn't be pushed upon us, as it's something, within the family. And so we talk about that. And I'd love to just get your thoughts to really dive further into that.
Well, John, you put it very well. I think the magical word of subsidiarity, which is my third chapter, my third Habsburg rule, is the absolute antidote to globalism. And most people feel the threat of globalism. They feel the threat of decisions being made on a level that is so far removed from democratic legitimation that we poor little worms never will have any influence on those big decisions that are being made far above even state or federal level. You sometimes have the impression these things are being duked out in different places than the political places that we vote for. So subsidiarity is the absolute opposite to that. Subsidiarity is the principle that the lower level should do what the lower level has to do, and that the higher level should be weaker and should only interfere if it can do something and is better able to do something than the lower level. That's very, very vague. I'm not a political philosopher. But what that means is, for instance, in Europe, in the European Union, Hungary decided to make a law that protects children in schools from gender propaganda. The whole of Europe freaked out. They freaked out. There were yells and screams, and Brussels tried to do everything to break us on this. But this is the exact point. If the European Union consists of nations, and nations have sovereignty, then they should have the right to do that, because this is closer. We human beings are local human beings. We are family. We are homestead. We are perhaps township. The state is already quite a high level, to speak with American images. The federal level should be really weak. This is something that fits with humanity, with us humans. We're built like that. And the Habsburgs did this from the beginning. Now, sometimes they did it better and sometimes they did it worse, but it was a principle. I can quote Charles V. Charles V, who lived in the 16th century, who writes to his son Philip II, if you rule over different nations, you have to respect their rights, their languages, their habits, their local institutions, and you really have to respect them. If not, you're in trouble. And this is in the 16th century. And Emperor Leopold said to, no, it was Ferdinand II, said to his subjects in other parts of the world, if I ever take away your local rights, then you can strike me down, or something like that. So this was always an element. The Habsburgs only once or twice tried to centralize, and when they did that, it went terribly wrong. We're not made for that. And the United States we in Europe, we are looking with hope towards the United States, because you still have this. The United States are built upon this system. In theory, the township should be strong, the state should be a bit less strong, and the federal level should not be very strong. But there are other powers within your system, and I'm very strongly encouraging to think about these things, because this is the answer to the fears that many people have nowadays, where they feel that we don't count, but democracy should be something. Listen to the Habsburg defending democracy. Democracy should be something where the people should vote for politicians who put into practice what the majority of the people think correct, and not something where decisions are being made on a level so far above that our election will never have an influence on that.
Yes, exactly. There needs to be a lot of getting back to basics with political powers in this time, and I think you offer a really common sense way of approaching that. And I love that. My last question is, you kind of conclude your book with a wonderful reflection on a good death, and that's something that I wouldn't say our culture, I would say the whole modern world doesn't deal very well with. We spend a lot of time, a lot of money trying to ward off aging, death, all of these things, and live as long as possible. And yet you're actually inviting people to not run away from death, but to actually die well. And I would love to hear your thoughts on that, just kind of in conclusion.
Yes, I would say the story to to explain what the Habsburgs stood for is very easy. If you watched the funeral of Queen Elizabeth, and I think that half of the world population did watch the funeral and was touched by it. There was a moment when the coffin of Queen Elizabeth was slowly lowered into the floor of the crypt, and while it was lowered, they read out her titles. And everybody was very touched by that. But of course, I laughed inside because I compared this to the Habsburg knocking ritual, which was similar, but then quite different, very Catholic. I was present twice at this Habsburg ritual, and it exemplifies why the Habsburgs live with their eyes on the final moment of their life. So the coffin is being brought in the center of Vienna is the Kapuzinerkirche. It's the Church of the Capuchins. And beside that is a door, and there you go down the stairs, and down there is the crypt of the Habsburgs, the Kapuziner Gruft. And the coffin arrives, the pallbearers, and then you have the master of ceremony knocking at the door. And from inside, the voice of a Capuchin priest answers, "Who is there?" And then they read out the titles. The titles are Zita, Empress of Austria, Queen of Hungary, Queen of Croatia, Queen of Bohemia, Princess of... And they read all 30 seconds of titles. And the voice from inside says, "We don't know her." And then they knock a second time, and then they read all her achievements. And the voice again says, "We don't know her." And the third knocking is Zita, a poor sinner. And the door opens. And this is the attitude of the Habsburgs. They were strongly conscious that they were poor sinners, that they were weak, that they were under original sin, that they had to render accountability to God, not only for their spiritual life, but also for what they did as an emperor all their lives. That's why I believe that politicians who believe in something are something positive, because you can hold them accountable to their values. And they knew that the way I die will decide about my eternal life, because they believed in heaven and hell. So some of the Habsburgs, unfortunately, in my opinion, didn't do this really well, but most of them did. And what they did was they prepared in life. You cannot just believe that when you are going to die that you will be ready for God if you don't prepare your entire life for this. If you don't learn how to pray, if you don't learn how to pray a rosary, if you don't learn, for instance, how to pray when you have headache and fever and are tired, you have to train this during your life to be ready when the moment comes. You don't know how God is going to send death in your direction. You have no idea. It may be something that dropped on you. It may be an accident. It may be slow death in a hospital bed. You don't know it. You give all of this to God. You ask God for a good death. And the Habsburgs had the extra situation that their death was always public. So every Catholic in the realm looked at how the emperor died, and it was known how he died. There was always a bulletin about it. I think this is fantastic. It's absolutely fantastic. We have put death into very distant hospitals, or sometimes in a violent form. We know when there is an attack or something, we see images of death. But this is part of our life, always was. And I strongly encourage everybody to prepare for death and to embrace the moment of your death and to give it to God and say, "I take it the way you send it. Thank you very much." And because it's part of your life, it's one of the greatest moments of your life. It's easy to say that now, but the experience and family experience confirms this over and over and over again.
Wow. Yeah, thanks be to God. Well, I am just really grateful for all of that. So speaking to our listeners, men, if you've enjoyed this conversation, I'm going to put in the show notes all the links to get the Habsburg Way Edward von Habsburg's new book. It's very practical. It's not a history book. And it's something that is all about how to apply these to your own life, regardless of your state in life and where you're at. So I strongly encourage you to check that out and pick that up. And Edward, any final pearls of wisdom or things you would like to leave the men that are listening to this episode?
Well, never give up. It's worthwhile fighting. B, I'll be in the States in the first week of May. I might be somewhere where we could meet and shake hands. Okay. Follow my Twitter account. I will put out where I am. And what I would do is, if I don't have an open reading event, I will try to make a tweet up where I will say, I will be at that and that place at that and that time if you want to meet me. So you can meet me in person. Try to be nice. Try to be heroes. Don't go with the flow.
Amen. Wow.
And thank you for having me on the show.
Well, we are so grateful. It's an honor to meet you, to get to know you, and to hear from your lineage, your wisdom, and your experience. And we're just both so grateful. So thank you.
Yes, thank you. And see you again one day in Texas, I hope.
Yeah, I hope so too. Exactly. We'll trigger David Ross to do another event. So
yes.
Wonderful. Well, as we like to end each of our episodes,
be a man, be a saint.